Welcome to the 18th Annual Ridenhour Prizes, brought to you by the Fertel Foundation, Stuart R. Mott Foundation, Project on Government Oversight, Type Media Center, and Government Accountability Project. I'm Danielle Bryan, the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO. I hope this is the last year we can't all be together in person, but the great thing is because we've learned how to do this virtually, many of you are joining us for the first time. I'm excited you've chosen to spend your evening with us as we recognize those who persevere in acts of truth-telling that protect the public interest, promote social justice, or illuminate a more just vision of society. The purpose of the Ridenhour Prizes is to memorialize the spirit of fearless truth-telling that whistleblower and investigative journalist Ron Ridenhour reflected throughout his extraordinary life and career. Of course, we couldn't do this without the support of our sponsors, Katz, Marshall & Banks and Cross Currents Foundation. Thank you for your generous contributions and seeing the importance of recognizing those who speak truth to power. Throughout the night, I hope you all consider joining these sponsors and becoming a part of the Ridenhour family. We've made it easy for you. The donation button is right below the screen. If you're watching with a full screen, you'll have to minimize it just for a moment to find that button. No matter the size of the contribution, each dollar helps us to celebrate individuals who are willing to share their truths and make great sacrifices for the greater good of their communities. If there's a theme tonight, it's about abuse of power and what happens when government works against the people it is intended to serve. From police brutality to imprisoning journalists, turning away the hungry, to forcing people out of their homes and off their land, the stories we will hear tonight are all about the need to fight back and demand that our government serve the people and not only the powerful. Tonight, we'll be hearing from some of those communities most harmed when leaders ignore, or worse, turn against the people. But first, let's hear from our co-founder, Randy Fertel, who, with Hamilton Fish, came up with the idea of this celebration to honor the legacy of the great Ron Ridenhour.
These awards are usually given at the National Press Club, an august venue that we really miss. We hope to be back there next April when we resume our usual spring calendar. One year, maybe 5 years in, I saw Daniel Shore, once an international correspondent with Edward R. Murrow at CBS, and later who had a great run at NPR in his late years. He was at a prime table near the podium. Before things started, I approached, hoping to coax a story out of him. Getting our prizes covered is a constant challenge. To you journalists out there, consider that a hint. I said, "You and Ron have something in common, you know. You were both on Nixon's enemies list." "Yeah," he replied curtly. "But Ron was just on Nixon's second enemies list. I was on the first." I got to know Ron Ridenhour, this B-lister, when I learned that the man who blew the whistle on My Lai, the worst known atrocity of the Vietnam War, was an investigative reporter in New Orleans, where I taught a course on the literature of the war. The theme of atrocity, of crossing a line one should never cross, was unavoidable. Each semester, Ron would mesmerize my students with his dark story, bringing to life a central theme of their readings. What made his story so compelling was the anger, still, 25 years later, and the regret. Because Ron was a humbled man who had experienced what he solemnly called an epiphany around his decision to expose the My Lai massacre, something he had to do or be complicit. Yet, for all that, he felt the true lessons of My Lai, misconstrued or long forgotten, went unheeded. Make no mistake, Ron changed history with his letter about the lines American grunts crossed murdering 504 Vietnamese weaponless villagers, many mowed down in a ditch. The official military after-action report, it told a glowing story instead of a great American victory over 128 Viet Cong regulars with hundreds of weapons seized. In fact, there had only been 3 French colonial rifles rusty with age. After-action reports are the military's rough first draft of history. Ron's was a radical revision. America's trust in the war plummeted. Ron changed history, but he felt that, like Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess, whose predictions were always accurate but always disbelieved, that history had lost the true lessons of My Lai. Ron was adamant that the chain of command who had ordered the massacre, who had watched the 4-hour carnage from helicopters stacked above, that they could have stopped it at any time. 4 hours, the length of time we spent watching the Capitol insurrection. Remember how long that felt? In the end, 1 colonel was tried and acquitted. Only one second lieutenant, William Calley, was found guilty. Nixon soon commuted his sentence. Truth-tellers often feel like Cassandras. It takes a while to get heard, and sometimes you're put on an enemy's list, lose your livelihood or your pension, or worst of all, the thing you put your life on the line for is forgotten or misconstrued. For Ron, the military learned the wrong lessons from My Lai and from the war in general. For Ron, no, My Lai wasn't about bad apples, but about illegal orders. No, getting rid of the draft wasn't the solution. We need citizen soldiers like Ron himself to be there, to bear witness. And we need journalists with open access to the fields of battle, not small pools of reporters who must follow strict guidelines. And no, delegating the trigger fingers to surrogates wasn't the solution. For Ron El Mozote in El Salvador, the slaughter of 800 villagers was a prime example. The Perps, the Atlacatl Battalion, trained at the U.S. Army School of the Americas and funded by the Iran-Contra affair. 1 village, 1 atrocity among many, and many laws broken by the Reagan administration. Finally, if the Pentagon decided the problem was boots on the ground, bad apples like Calley or good apples like Ron, to that Ron said, no, the solution is not the new American way of war, highly developed, detached technologies that led to the aerial and naval bombardment of Iraq in the first Gulf War, shock and awe in the second Gulf War, and now the drone wars in Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and who knows where else. Here's another reason we need to heed the Cassandras in our midst. In 1996, Ron reported a piece for NBC's Dateline on the militia movement. In Ron's view, Timothy McVeigh's bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building was not the explosive end of the militia movement. It was a beginning of something. What Ron reported was that the militia movement was first inspired and funded by Governor Ronald Reagan and then supported by President Reagan. At the time, Ron's piece struck me as a little nutty. As it turned out, as we've now seen, Ron nailed the story on the emerging right-wing militia movement and its roots in conservative politics, 25 years before the January 6th insurgency. Ron was dogged. He stayed on it. All to say we need to trust our whistleblowers and investigative reporters. We need to support them. Did Ron make a difference? One answer I'd like to think are these annual prizes that celebrate truth-telling wherever we find it. Before he died, Ron heard an affirmative answer from something of an oracular voice. On a panel with Cy Hirsch, who first reported Ron's story in the press, David Halberstam quoted Emerson, "If one good man plant himself upon his conscience, the whole world will come round." Then David pointed a finger at Ron and said, "You are that one good man." The Ridenhour Prizes exist to make sure that Cassandras get heard so that the third draft of history gets told. I welcome this year's prize winners, Cariel Horn, Jose Andres, Ramona Diaz, and Claudio Sant, into the Ridenhour family. Because that's what you did. That's what you do. Tell truths that people often don't want to hear or would like to forget. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Our first prize is the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize, which is presented to a citizen, corporate, or government whistleblower, investigative journalist, or organization for bringing a specific issue of social importance to the public's attention. This year's honoree fought a battle against police brutality and racial injustice that might have been ignored by history had she not had the strength and conviction of an oracle. Here to present her with the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize is Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who himself successfully prosecuted Derek Chauvin, the police officer who murdered George Floyd. That case changed our country. He will put our extraordinary awardee's story into context.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison, and I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. And I am so honored today because it's my distinct privilege to give the award for truth-telling, the Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize, to none other than Cariel Horn. She is the 2021 Ridenhour Truth-Telling Prize Award winner. The Ridenhour Prize is a special prize because it goes to truth tellers like Cariel Horn, and it's presented to people every year who may be citizens, corporate, or government, or whistleblowers, investigative journalists, or an organization for bringing a specific issue of social importance to the public's attention. Cariel Horn, many years ago, more than a decade and a half ago, intervened when a fellow officer was brutalizing a suspect in custody. She, doing her job as a police officer, intervened to stop it. And as a result of her heroic and faithful service to her job and her badge, she was fired and had to fight for 15 years to get her pension back. That's Cariel Horn. You know, the committee selected her because it recognized her acts of heroism. The work that she did and the courage that she displayed really is the epitome of exemplary policing. And she is a change maker in the police reform movement. I happen to know a little bit about it. I was the lead prosecutor in the case we brought against Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. And so we have been working to make sure that there's true police accountability in our country. But years before that case, Cariel Horn was at the very forefront of making sure that to protect and serve really was what officers were about. The fact is, her commitment to ensuring that police officers are protected when they interrupt police brutality is honorable. And she is a progressive law enforcement officer who really put her career and her health and safety on the line when she intervened to protect a suspect who was being brutalized. Her courageous acts have paved the way for others to follow suit and ensure accountability. Cariel Horn is a visionary and the impact of Carriel's law, enshrining the duty to intervene, will have communities members who will benefit for many, many years to come. I just want to say that Carriel Horn reflects the legacy of Ron Ridenhour, a true truth teller and trailblazer, and whose name this award is made. And she stands up as an excellent example of what we want police officers to be: true protectors and guardians of people, no matter who those people may be. Her story is one that is inspiring, and her impact on the community is everlasting. And so I just want to say, Carriel Horn, you deserve this award, and may your example shine throughout the land. Congratulations on being the 2021 Ridenhour Truth Telling Prize winner, and may you continue to tell truth wherever you go. Thank you very much.
For you, Carriel.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The death of George Floyd really put into perspective of why we need police reform. If an officer is actively going beyond the call of duty and another officer is present, they should have the duty to intervene, and that's what Carriel's Law is. Carriel's Law is a mandate statute on police bystander intervention. It provides protection from retaliation and requires external investigation with mandated reprimanding for abuse or misconduct. The 6 components of Carriel's Law as it was written are acronym the PAIR: duty to intervene, accountability if an officer does not intervene, protection for officers who do intervene, accountability for falsifying reports. It impacts policies, and there's also restorative justice, which is what I wrote and which was used to give me to overturn the decision to fire me. There also needs to be a national registry to protect others from that officer switching to another department. Reacting beyond the call of duty, who can stop them? Another officer can. An average citizen, as we saw in the George Floyd video, cannot. Well, state law may allow it, but who would chance it? Had there not been video from the George Floyd case, we may not be making strides in police reform today, although I personally don't think we are making enough. While thinking of creating solutions in police reform, I thought of why I lost my job and how I did not want it to happen to another officer who stuck with their morals and did what is right. It is with great pleasure that I accept the Ridenhour Award on behalf of police officers who intervene and choose to speak truth to power.
Incredible, right? Our next prize is the Ridenhour Book Prize, which honors an outstanding work of social significance from the prior publishing year. The prize also recognizes investigative and reportorial distinction. While our country is slowly beginning to fully recognize the ongoing impact of the legacy of slavery on the Black community, we are far from understanding the traumas that continue to be perpetrated against our Native American communities. In fact, we often lie to ourselves to gloss over that history. Last week, Dana Hedgepeth, a Native American journalist at the Washington Post, published a deep dive into the history of Thanksgiving. I learned from that article that far from what most of us believe, the Wampanoags, who taught the Pilgrims how to plant their crops, were not even invited to that Thanksgiving dinner, which happened 400 years ago this month. The subject of the book, Unworthy Republic, is the Trail of Tears, the gruesome legacy of President Andrew Jackson. As you learn more tonight, think about the fact that a triumphant statue of Andrew Jackson on horseback continues to stand in front of the White House. Meet Rebecca Nagel, presenter of the Ridenhour Book Prize, citizen of the Cherokee Nation, activist, and host of the podcast, This Land.
In Cherokee, our word for the Trail of Tears is Degedi Lastana. It's the same word we use to talk about hurting animals are driving a car. It means when they herded us. To prepare, the army split logs, drove them into the ground lengthwise, and built open-air stockades. From there, they got ready for the task of rounding up an estimated 16,000 people at gunpoint. They thought it would probably take about 20 days. It took 25. Cherokee people were not prepared. Men were out hunting, women were plowing fields, children were visiting friends and relatives. But when the soldiers showed up, there was no time. No time to collect belongings, find loved ones, or prepare to walk halfway across a continent. Exact figures are hard to come by, but an estimated 2,000 people died in the stockades, and thousands more died on the forced migration. It is often said that if we don't understand our past, we are doomed to repeat it. And that's the case with the genocide of indigenous people of this country. Our indigenous nations lost an estimated 95 to 97% of our population and 98% of our land to European colonization. And whether or not what we survived should be called genocide is still debated widely. That's why Claudio Sant's book, Unworthy Republic, is an important contribution to the national discourse and historical record. He lays out in exact detail how this chapter of genocide happened, the expulsion of Native nations to west of the Mississippi in the 1830s. Sant introduces us to the benevolent bureaucrats who, through a combination of racism and condescension, truly believed that they were helping. He introduces us to the populist politicians who campaigned on the open promise of ethnic cleansing. He introduces us to the indigenous intellectuals, writers, activists, and their network of allies that campaigned against and nearly defeated the Indian Removal Act. And he introduces us to the profiteers, the land speculators, the bankers, and the enslavers who made unimaginable sums of money by flipping indigenous land for the expansion of chattel slavery. While the human cost of removal is so great, it could never be calculated, so too were the profits. The book demands the reader to interrogate our history, to ask not only what kind of country would commit such grave human rights violation, but what kind of country would do all this and then forget. And so it is my honor to present the 2021 Ridenhour Book Prize to Claudio Sant.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. I'm tremendously honored that Unworthy Republic has received this year's Ridenhour Book Prize. It's especially meaningful to me because the atrocity that Ron Ridenhour brought to the world's attention, the 1968 My Lai massacre in Vietnam, followed in the wake of others committed by the United States in earlier wars, not overseas, but right here in North America, against the continent's indigenous inhabitants. In short, there are connections and continuities in U.S. imperialism across the centuries, and my work focuses on the early part of this long history when Europeans began colonizing the continent and dispossessing native villagers. Unworthy Republic describes the era we commonly call Indian removal in the 1830s, though it's a policy more accurately described not as removal, but as deportation, expulsion, and even extermination. When I started working on this book 8 years ago, I was interested in situating the United States alongside other nations in the 19th and 20th centuries that had counted, evaluated, deported, and tried to exterminate people within their borders, nations such as Bourbon France, Tsarist Russia, and Nazi Germany. As I was researching and writing, the politics in the United States were changing around me. the subject of Unworthy Republic became more tightly relevant. In fact, I came to recognize the present in the past, and that served as a motivating force for me, and I think made the book more urgent. As I dug into the project, storylines emerged that continue to resonate today. For example, the federal government in the 1830s had outsized ambitions, though it employed a total of only 600 people in Washington. The best and brightest of the federal officers, following Andrew Jackson's orders and with Congress's approval, carried out a degrading, dangerous, and irreversible experiment with the lives of other people by shipping 80,000 indigenous Americans, including, of course, children, pregnant women, infants, and the elderly and frail, shipping them hundreds of miles west to uncharted land. This exercise in hubris, rooted in an unshakable faith in white supremacy, foundered when cholera spread through the refugee camps, when winter storms descended on the migrants, and more predictably when contractors failed to deliver their promises, leaving the deportees starving and exposed to the elements. Yet, federal officials took satisfaction in properly folded reports, in accurate accounting to the fraction of a penny, and in the systematized filing of paperwork, all the while shielding their eyes from the full scope and impact of the extraordinary human operation they were directing from afar. There's a second storyline all too familiar to us today. Wall Street made sure that the government operation became a source of profit for itself, and New York's leading financiers invested millions of dollars in the dispossession of Native peoples. More than one congressman had a direct financial interest in separating indigenous families from their farms. As a result of this alliance between the federal government and Wall Street, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek households lost vast sums, equivalent to wiping out the net worth of all but the wealthiest families in the United States today. The struggle of Native Americans to hold on to their lands and to retain their sovereign rights is ongoing, as Rebecca Nagel has so compellingly documented in her podcast, This Land. So I want to conclude by recognizing the indigenous Americans whose stories make up Unworthy Republic, by honoring the people who lost their lives and lands, and by acknowledging the survivors and their descendants. Unworthy Republic is about dispossession, white supremacy, and indigenous rights in the 1830s, but the story continues to this day.
Before we head into our next award, we would like to thank our sponsors, Katz, Marshall & Banks and the Cross Currents Foundation. Thank you for your generous contributions in making tonight possible. For those of you who are watching online, there is that donation button right below the screen. Join us in the fight to make it safe to expose wrongdoing and speak truth to power. Next, we have the Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize, which is given to a documentary film that, in the view of the judges, best reflects the legacy of Ron Ridenhour. The prize seeks to recognize a documentary that defends the public interest, advances or promotes social justice, or illuminates a more just vision of society. If you haven't yet seen 1,000 Cuts on Amazon, you'll want to after this. The film goes inside the escalating war between the Philippine government and the press. Although our audience is primarily in the United States, as now Nobel Prize-winning journalist Maria Ressa points out in the film, what has been happening in the Philippines is an early warning for what is happening in the United States, a clear slide towards authoritarianism.
Mr. President, is it important that people be afraid of you? Fear.
Yes.
Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa.
Maria Ressa carries the torch of press freedom in a country held in thrall by a populist president.
It started with the drug war.
Do not do drugs because I will kill you.
President Duterte began his administration with the drug list.
This is the drug industry of the Philippines.
He showed everyone a list. People on that list started dying.
I'm telling the Filipino people it's gonna be bloody.
We demanded the government be held accountable.
Duterte was annoyed by our reporting.
You are a fake news outlet. They will be allowed to criticize us, but you go to jail for your crime.
We started getting attacked on social media. The government created disinformation networks, so people have no idea what the truth is. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour.
We don't even know whether we can trust the police to protect us.
Just because you're a journalist na ito, you're exempted from assassination.
We didn't even realize how dangerous it is for you.
Why are you crying?
Because I'm scared for you.
Maria Ressa has been arrested.
The charges against Ressa were aimed at intimidating those who challenged Duterte's rule.
If I fall, I stand up, break these walls.
So why should you care about what happens in the Philippines?
They test the tactics of how to manipulate America in our country. If it works, they port it over to the rest of the world.
Maria Ressa was one of 4 journalists named as Time Magazine's Person of the Year.
Maria won't be afraid. I'm afraid for her.
What we're seeing is death by 1,000 cuts. Little cuts of Philippine democracy. We will not duck. We will not hide. We will hold the line.
Presenting the award to the filmmaker is director of the Stabile Center for Investigative Journalism at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, Sheila Coronel.
The winner of this year's Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize tells the story of an autocratic government and its war against the press. The film, 1,000 Cuts, by Ramona Diaz, is on the Philippines, one of the many battlegrounds around the world where populist strongmen wrestle with the media. Ramona tells the story of Rappler, a small, feisty news site founded nearly a decade ago by Maria Ressa, this year's winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Rappler has been the pebble in Duterte's shoe since his election in 2016. Its staff has reported on Duterte's war on drugs that has claimed thousands of lives, mostly in the country's poorest neighborhoods. It exposed corruption among the president's men and documented the workings of a government-funded disinformation army. In 1,000 Cuts, Ramona films the Rappler staff as they cover midterm elections held in 2019. In intimate scenes that bring us inside the Rappler newsroom, she shows how the staff soldiers on despite unrelenting harassment from troll armies and the fear of being shut down. In one scene, the editors tease each other about going to jail, a moment that is both light and chilling. Duterte is the gaslighter-in-chief of the Philippines. He has called Rappler a fake news outlet, throwing trash and shit. He said Rappler's stories are pregnant with falsity. The film shows the psychic toll that rape and death threats have taken on Maria Ressa. Since 2018, she and Rappler have been charged multiple times with offenses including tax evasion and cyber libel. Maria calls it death by 1,000 cuts, the way autocrats weaponize the law and social media to chip away at the freedoms of both journalists and citizens. In the 21st century, democracy no longer dies in a hail of bullets, nor is it crushed beneath the weight of tanks. Instead, it dies in workaday courts where judicial precedents are cast aside, in newsrooms where terrorized journalists self-censor, and on Facebook and other social media platforms where truth and facts are under siege. 1,000 Cuts shows how Maria Ressa and Rappler are an example of principled resistance to the erosion of democratic norms This is a film made by women. This is a film made by a woman about a newsroom led by women standing up to a misogynist president. This is a film made by a woman about a newsroom led by women standing up to a misogynist president. It is my honor to present the Ridenhour Documentary Film Prize to 1,000 Cuts for telling the story of a group of women journalists who embody the legacy of Ron Ridenhour, journalist, truth teller, and democracy defender.
And now, Ramona Diaz, director of 1,000 Cuts.
Hello, I'm recording this in Manila, where I have just started production on my new film. Documentary films are a tough proposition to begin with, but it's been made exponentially tougher by the pandemic. There are times when I really wonder why I do this kind of work. And then I hear that 1,000 Cuts received the Ridenhour Prize, and it really so inspires me and my team to move on, to do the work. A few weeks ago, Maria Ressa, the protagonist of 1,000 Cuts, won the Nobel Peace Prize. The prize signaled to journalists all over the world that their work matters, that telling truth to power matters, and truth itself matters, or democracies wither and die. And so too does the Ridenhour Prize for 1,000 Cuts. At a time when freedom of the press is under siege globally, this couldn't come at a better time. So thank you so much for honoring the film in this manner. And I'm so humbled by the company I keep and all the other people and filmmakers who have won this prize in the past. I'd like to thank all of the people who have made this film with me. As you know, film is a team sport. So I'd like to thank my producers, Julie Goldman, Chris Clements, Carolyn Hepburn, and at Concordia Studios, Laureen Powell-Jobs, Davis Guggenheim, Jonathan Silberberg, Nicole Stott. And of course, Illuminate, Topic, Sundance, Chicken and Eggs, Cinereach, the IDA, Catapult, and the Cornfields. And of course, Rainey Aronson Rath and her team at Frontline. And last but not the least is Leah Marino, who is my editor and producer, who has been integral in all of my other films. I can't do this work without Leah, so thank you, Leah. And the men and women in the Philippines who were really brave enough to take us on and work with us on this film at a time when life was so uncertain. Documentary films are not possible without the participants really opening up their lives to us. So I want to thank Maria Ressa and her team at Rappler for really trusting us with their story. You know, it's not all about prizes, I know. The work itself is a privilege, a profound privilege, but prizes and validation do matter because they amplify the work, and prizes give the work legs. So again, thank you, Ridenhour Prize, the Fertel and Mott Foundations, for recognizing the singular impact of documentary films. Maraming salamat and goodbye for now from Manila.
Our final award tonight is the Ridenhour Courage Prize, which is presented to an individual in recognition of their courageous and lifelong defense of the public interest and passionate commitment to social justice. We are very lucky that former Truth Teller Prize winner Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz Soto has returned this year to present the Ridenhour Courage Prize for us. None of us will forget your powerful defense of the Puerto Rican people after Hurricane Maria ravaged the island, and when then President of the United States Donald Trump simply threw paper towel rolls to the people who were hungry and without power. Thank you for being with us to present the Ridenhour Courage Prize to our global leader in feeding the hungry.
How am I going to make it? How am I going to take care of the ones I love? These are some of the questions that creep into your heart in the darkest hours after a devastating crisis. You know, nothing will ever be the same. And you understand that without help, you and your loved ones will not make it. You're hungry, and as your body weakens, so does your hope. And just when you think despair is your only fate, you see them. This enormous army of men and women whose sole purpose is to put hope back in our lives one meal at a time. I met him in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. Where others could not deliver, he came to our rescue. It took him just days to put in place a massive relief operation to do one simple but extraordinary thing: feed us. And in doing so, he gave us a powerful message. We mattered. We were not alone. With his rambunctious personality and his will-do attitude towards life, Jose Andres manages to arrive at hard-to-get places faster than governments who failed to do their jobs. With uncanny ability, he leads the World Kitchen Organization to set up immediate and robust relief operations that, for many, will make the difference between life and death. And they managed to do it with a local flavor. For more than a decade, the World Kitchen Organization has served more than 50 million meals in more than 400 cities. Whether it be Puerto Rico after a hurricane, in Haiti after an earthquake, in Washington, D.C. after a government shutdown, in the Bahamas or Lebanon, this award recipient is the vivid example of what happens when you rely on the most important ingredient of all: love. Jose Andres, you have served love as the main course with a healthy portion of solidarity and hope as a side dish for more than 10 years. You have understood the relief efforts are about a simple but tremendously powerful concept. They are about saving lives. For your outstanding, bold, relentless, and fearless contribution to the well-being of people all over the world, and for giving new meaning to the phrase, food for the soul, the Ron Ridenhour Foundation awards you the 2021 Courage Prize.
Dear people of the Ridenhour Prizes, thank you for being here with us tonight. I am honored to join you to accept the 2021 Ridenhour Courage Prize. The former recipients of this award have shown the courage to create change through simple actions that add up to make a huge difference. They've shown the courage to speak up, the courage to act out. They've shown courage that inspires us all, not just because of who they are or what they've done, but because we see in their example that courage can empower each of us to improve our communities in meaningful ways. A long time ago, almost 150 years before this prize was created, there was a woman who demonstrated the courage to help the wounded during the Civil War, putting her skills as a humble nurse at the service of her country, and in the process, bringing peace to the families of missing soldiers. Her name was Clara Barton, and her work inspired the creation of the American Red Cross. You know, when I founded my NGO World Central Kitchen in 2010, after the Haiti earthquake, the goal was simple: to learn from the courage I saw among Haitian men and women and those who came to their aid, to feed people in their most difficult moments. To learn from Clara's example, how cooks like me could be part of not just feeding the few, but also the many. In the years since, I've seen courage in so many places and from so many people who have joined our fight so that hungry people may eat. Like, for example, in Puerto Rico, where after Hurricane Maria, it was a 10-year-old girl named Lola leading an army of volunteers making thousands of sandwiches each day, while her parents used their food truck to feed remote places on the island. everywhere we go. It's this courage that inspires the people of Wall's Central Kitchen to continue our work to bring empathy, nourishment, and hope, one plate of food at a time. As we prepare for a future with more natural disaster, fueled by the climate crisis, more economic instability, and more people forced to migrate in search of a better life for their families, we must find inspiration in everyday examples of civic engagement and maintain our courage to act with the first urgency of now. Thank you.
What a night. I hope tonight was filled with empowerment and inspiration for you. It was for me. Our honorees and presenters remind us to continue to foster the spirit of courage and truth throughout our daily lives. Thank you again to our sponsors, Katz, Marshall & Bank and the Cross Currents Foundation. And thank you in advance to those of you who made individual contributions tonight. I also want to thank Janelle Williams from Pogo for making this whole event possible. Please look us up at ridenhour.org. There you can learn more about the organization and subscribe to our monthly newsletters to receive updates. And be sure to follow us on social media at Ridenhour Prizes on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Have a great rest of your night.